We're here in Red Books with local author Daithi Kavanagh. This coming Friday night, Daithi will officially launch his dystopian trilogy, which was brought out during the COVID lockdowns, and of course each book didn't get its own launch at that point due to restrictions. The dystopian trilogy features The Green Wave, The Hydra Syndrome and The Storm. 3 books that are connected by a common theme, which is that kind of bleak dystopian future. What was it? Was it COVID that made you write that, Daithi, or was it other things going on in the world?
No, well, the original book I wrote in this trilogy was The Green Wave, which was I wrote prior to the restrictions and prior to the COVID, but this is about, as you can imagine, it's about the Greens taking over the world, and the unfortunate thing about it is the Greens were taken over by large corporations, and so that kind of messed up the whole idea that this was about a green revolution. It ended up that it had more to do with making profit, and that's what quite a lot of people unfortunately believe, that this whole green wave is about. It is getting taken over by corporations, and they are starting to make profits out of electric cars and things like that. Now, I am pro-green, but I'm not pro-corporation. So that's where the idea for the book came out of.
A few people who read The Green Wave said it reminded them of a cross between George Orwell and Michel Houellebecq. There's certainly a lot of adult content in there.
There is a lot of adult content, and it gets a bit hairy at times. But I think that's important in literature. Not in every book you write, but you know, not to be afraid of touching certain subjects. I mean, there's a lot of taboos today. I grew up in the so-called era when we were supposed to be dominated by Catholicism, but I find society much stricter now than it was when I was growing up, which is strange considering we supposedly got rid of all the rules and regulations when the church kind of came into demise. But so my way of thinking, and I like when I write a book, I like it to be a bit realistic, like possible. Like my kind of dystopian novels, they're not set in this impossible world, a world that doesn't exist. They're usually set in a world that already exists. For instance, the Hydra Syndrome is set in London, and it's about a man trapped in his house. There's been a virus, and they're blaming the older generation for the virus, that they're saying that they brought it out, and they're hanging people, they're hanging politicians from lampposts, they're burning people down in their houses. There's mobs ruling, have taken over the world, and this once again happened because people tried to use situations like a virus, like global warming. They tried to use those situations to make a profit to their own benefit. So that's why I like dystopian novels, not to be about something happening on Mars or little green men. I prefer them to be about us in a future world, not very far away.
Well, another thing you like to bring in is philosophy, and some people would say that modern dystopian and post-apocalyptic fiction resides only in the young adult genre, and it's now almost made just to be filmable. So people are making it so they can sell it to the likes of Netflix, so it's very dumbed down, some would say, whereas yours contains a lot of philosophy, a lot of politics. And I know as a bookseller that you have a particular interest in, you're widely read and you read a lot of philosophy. Is there any philosophers that you feel you've really infused their ideas into this trilogy?
Well, I suppose you can't Nietzsche is really the man who's kind of affected the 20th and the 21st century, in the sense that he imagined this new man, this common man, this man that was going to rule the world, and it that is happening in a way. The Ubermensch are in a sense taking over the world. They're not this superhuman that you imagine they're going to be. What they are, it's money and power, and the money and the powerful are taking over the world. And you know, you've a lot of talk today about political correctness, and how, you know, the middle class are leading the way there, and the upper class, and they're showing us how to be respectful of other people, and all these things are happening. But you know, if we look back in time, it was the upper class and the middle class who had slaves, and they're the ones now telling us what we should be doing once again, the ones who were actually the slave runners. And today they still have slaves. They don't exist in the USA. Well, they do in minimum wage jobs and things like that. But if you go to the third world, they have sweatshops making their Levi's and making their products, their Coca-Colas, and that's modern day slavery, and it's the same people. It isn't the poor who are creating slavery, and it never was. We're not the racists. They are the real racists, but they hide behind their media. And that's what my books tend to be about, how the rich and the powerful can hide behind the media, these Ubermensch that Nietzsche spoke about. My first novel I brought out here with Red Books was The Small House Cooperative, and this was about ordinary people growing up in Wexford town, and they'll be available along with the trilogy on Friday night. But this was young people drinking cider and drinking in pubs and getting into fights, but I brought philosophy into it, because ordinary people are interested in philosophy. This might be a surprise to some people, but you know, I had friends, we sat around in graveyards drinking cider and discussing philosophy when we were 15, 16 years of age. And it's not recognised. You know, people feel today you have to have an education, you have to go at the third level to acquire this kind of knowledge, but it's there. I mean, you remember Wally on building sites and fellas reading in who'd never been to school, never went beyond 6th class, and they were reading all kinds of books sitting in the canteen. So knowledge is everywhere, particularly in books, you know, and most of my knowledge I didn't get from school. I acquired it a lot of in here, in this shop. You know,
you say knowledge is everywhere, and particularly in books. And in your third book, The Storm, in the near future Ireland, Nazis attack a local bookshop and burn it down.
Yeah, well,
and which is a case of history repeating itself, and it's not always the Nazis aren't always carrying a flag that makes them recognisable. We see censorship all over the world at the moment. We see book banning back. In The Storm, it's also the middle class who help these people take power.
Yeah, it is. And the book, which is interesting, probably the other books are better in a sense, a more enjoyable read, I think. But this, what I like about this book, it's set in Ireland. It's just ordinary people, and once again, the storyline is possible. It's plausible. You know, these books are plausible. What happens in these books are very plausible, and there is a chance of something like that happening. I mean, at the moment we have a war going on in Ukraine, and this could give rise to populist governments. You know, in the book, it was a war in the Middle East that happened, a nuclear war, and that gave rise because immigrants were flooding into Europe, and it gave rise to fascism and right-wing populist governments. And unfortunately, Ireland had just achieved unity, and we had a 32 county socialist republic, and suddenly then this war happened in the Middle East. And let's face it, you know, the powers that be use wars to manipulate everything, just like they use climate change, just like they use viruses. They manipulate society through fear. And this is what happened here. And it's happening now, you know. And once again, this kind of right-wing populism is raising its ugly head. But the way I feel, it's no more fearful than some of the so-called democratic parties who are frightening the life out of people. They're pushing people away from the left towards these right-wing parties with their manipulation and ridiculing the left, the real left, the economic left. I'm not talking about modern left, I'm talking about the old-fashioned left that I grew up with, trade unions, jobs, giving people rights, giving us bank holidays, all these things. That was the left that I grew up with. Today's left is something totally different.
Daithi, you've now published 4 books and 3 ebooks, and you've done it all in a relatively short amount of time. I think you told me on a previous occasion that you only really started writing just over a decade ago.
Not even a decade ago, I don't think. I'm 64 now. I think I was about 57 when I started writing.
So that's incredibly
I went back
prolific.
to school. Once again, economics kind of pushed me in that direction, because I was employed as a musician, and the economy crashed. It took a few years, but eventually things got so difficult. I went back to school to try and re-educate, and it was in there that I started writing. As you know, Jim Maguire, he helped me. He said to me, you should be writing books. He said, your essays are very good, and I took off from there. And it was within a few years I'd had 3 crime novels written, and they were published as ebooks. And then I met you, and we started bringing out the books and selling them here in the shop, and I really enjoy doing it. You know, you can do anything. You know, I started playing music in my 40s, and I paid my mortgage playing music, something I never dreamed of doing. You know, and I think it's important, like you here in the shop, pursuing your dreams. You know, they might seem crazy to people, but you know, that's how you get happy, is by pursuing your dreams. You know,
absolutely. And you're what we'd call in a shop a chronic reader. You read everything. You read a lot of stuff.
Read a lot of
stuff. Would that be your advice to wannabe writers, young people coming up now?
Yeah, and my advice is, I started writing, sitting in the bed, writing during after the crash. I was sitting in the bed. I was still playing music, so I had days off, and I was sitting in the bed writing into copybooks, my kids' copybooks. And then my wife, who was a secretary, a legal secretary, she had been laid off as well, so she typed up the books for me. And you know, make the best of every situation, you know, and don't be afraid, just go for it. You know, we had a mortgage and children, and we decided, right, I done it with the music first, and now I'm doing it with literature. Just go for it, don't be afraid. That's my advice. Don't be afraid. Forget about careers and all this stuff. Just do what you feel in your heart. So
we'll be launching Daithi Kavanagh's dystopian trilogy, The Green Wave, The Hydra Syndrome and The Storm, here in Red Books at 7 p.m. on Friday night. We're going to have a very special offer. You can buy the whole trilogy for €20 on the night. If you picked up some of them already, come in and get the others, and Daithi will sign them for you. Daithi and Rory are going to play a bit of music, and it'll be fun.